Hey, everybody, I just want to jump on here for a moment, just talk a little bit about religion and religious programming and our spiritual evolution or our path of inner clearing. A teacher of mine once said that most of our discordant programming, actually, most of our blocks, most of our karma actually comes from religion, our connection to religious philosophy, to religious teachers, and especially lifetimes in which we may have been religious. Think about religion now. Religion is often you're born into a particular religion, your parents are of that religion, and you often, at least tangentially, if you're not actively participating in it, you are at least associated or connected with particular religions, probably for your entire life. Even people who consider themselves atheist or they've left their more formal practice of religion, in some ways it doesn't really matter when it comes to the kinds of karma or blocks we have, because sometimes just leaving the religion doesn't mean that we've actually gotten rid of or cleared the programming that we have. That might still be on the subconscious. I think about religion sometimes as in the word God, whatever that equivalent word might be in a particular religious or cultural tradition. This word God, I grew up with believing that this was a male being, probably white male being somewhere in the sky, that was only specific to my religion, that everyone else in every other religion wasn't actually praying to that true God, and that this being it was sort of like an expanded father figure. However you viewed your earthly father or your biological relationship to your parents, it's that God character that I grew up with was very much a projection of the parent. So that God sometimes is loving, sometimes gives you things, sometimes withholds things, sometimes says you don't really need that, sometimes might get angry and punitive with you. This is the kind of this word God can connote those kinds of things. What I've really realized over time, though, is that the word God doesn't really mean anything. Eckhart Tolle, I first heard him say this a number of decades ago. He's like, I use the word being when I'm talking about spirituality or consciousness rather than the word God, because the word being doesn't really have any meaning, but the word God doesn't have any meaning either. If you really start to meditate on this, the word God is a reference to a concept, but what does it really mean? Do we need that word? And what does it mean for us to even use that word? This is sort of the aspect of what religion really does. I was listening to a church service this morning online, and I was kind of going along. I can sort of have a little bit more distance from my religion of youth these days. Even as I participate, I can sort of see this is what they're trying to get at when they say certain things or when they say certain prayers or whatever. But then the time in the service came for this kind of confession time. Those of you who come from Christianity or probably related religions know about this idea of confession. Something to be said for that, like getting stuff off your chest, releasing it, not self-restricting because you're feeling this guilt and shame because of something you think you've done wrong. All of this sort of thing. People say confession is good for the soul. Okay, that's cool. Getting it off your chest, telling someone, telling a friend, really processing it so it doesn't burden you anymore. Okay, fine and good. But these prayers of confession that I was seeing were really, really extremely negative. They were really intensifying the sense of separation from spirit, intensifying the sense of self-contraction, intensifying and repeating the sense of guilt and shame, rather than perhaps the opposite of that was the original intended effect. The prayer went on at some length about how we've committed all of the 7 deadly sins. I've done that. I've sinned against God. I've separated myself from God. Again, there's that word again, God, that doesn't mean anything other than it's a concept that we have, we project. And we then create all of these prayers in order to check in with what is our relationship with this concept that we've created. So I want to also say that this word God is a little bit like appealing to the highest court in the land. Here in the United States, we have the Supreme Court. So if things happen at lower courts, you can appeal and you can maybe eventually get something to the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court decides, there's no higher court beyond that in this country. So you can't appeal to something beyond that. You're simply, that's the final say. This word God, again, I say the word God, is kind of like a word that we use to denote the highest possible authority. We think, well, there's nothing beyond God. So if I say the word God, I'm denoting the highest authority and power. That can be really good. When I say the word spirit, I say the word consciousness, I say the word being, I'm kind of meaning the same thing. I say the word source. Those are all just words, by the way. They don't really mean anything. There's not a being called spirit or a being called source somewhere. This is just a word that we use to maybe denote something like the highest ultimate power, ultimate creative power, ultimate inner power of the universe. So we use these terms in order to denote that, and that can be perhaps a positive way as long as we don't take the concept too seriously. What happens as human intervention begins to come into religion is that we can't keep this concept of God or this word God or whatever it's meant to denote. We can't really keep that as a presence or an energy or as a state of realization. We don't keep it at that for very long. What we start to do is we start to use it as a mechanism of control, as humanity tends to do, especially traditionally in religion. I think all religions fall into this category. There's some element of spirituality there, at least originally, and then there's the element of we can use this concept, this idea of God, that which you cannot appeal to something higher than God. You can't say, oh, no, my God, well, some religions do, my God's better than your God. But ultimately, this idea of God is put there so that we can't appeal to something higher than that. And that's a very easy way to begin to use mechanisms of control. We're going to control people through what are the most potent mechanisms of control. We're going to control them through shame, through guilt, through fear. We're going to control them through controlling their sexuality. We're going to control them by telling them that we understand what's going to happen to your soul after you leave this life. And we have, as part of the religion, we have the only keys that you need to ensure that your soul doesn't go to a place of destruction. This is all of the programming I received as a child. So the word God can be powerful, perhaps, if you can use it in a way that denotes a state of silent, blissful presence. Don't take it too seriously, though, because it's just a word. It can also be meaningless. And it can also be, worst case scenario, a total mechanism of control. And I saw that in this church service. I don't think any of the people, ministers, whatever, who were praying this prayer were intentionally saying, aha, we're going to use this as a way of tricking our congregation into believing something so that we can get their money, we can get control over them, we can begin to get people who are guilt-tripped into coming into this community. I don't think anyone was consciously thinking that. I don't really think anyone is consciously thinking that. And yet the words we have, the prayers that we utter, have power to either open our spirit or to close our spirit. The prayers that we uttering are not really affecting an external being up in the sky called God. That being doesn't exist. That being is just a projection of our own relationship to our Father, or maybe Mother, even in perhaps a different case. But the prayers that we do don't change source, consciousness, God, external, whatever that higher being is. It only changes us. So if we're heaping condemnation, guilt, shame, fear upon ourselves, then our lives are going to be more limited. And this is where I get back to my teacher originally saying that most of our programming, most of the karma that we have to clear comes from religion, comes from not just our association with it in this lifetime. And even for people who are atheists, you are still highly influenced by the cultural zeitgeist, cultural milieu. You have, even if you're saying, I'm shunning my back on religion, that's still a reactionary energy oftentimes. It's not a neutrality. You're still programmed by the way that the cultures throughout the world have trickled down this idea of God into politics, into social culture, into hierarchical culture, into patriarchal culture. All of this stuff comes from our connection to what do we mean by that word God? Do we use that word God to denote love and peace and harmony? Do we use that word God to denote control, shame, fear, guilt? More or less, both of those things have been used, but often more towards the side of control. So I just wanted to jump on here and share that with you today. There's nothing inherently wrong about religion. We have to realize that beyond whatever cultural, religious programming context that we have inherited in our life or wherever we come from, we have to be very careful that we're not, ultimately, the God that we serve is really consciousness. It's the consciousness of that we are all a part of, and that it's individualized as us. And that consciousness only knows love and fulfillment and harmony. Consciousness doesn't have a bunch of religious rules and thou shalt nots. And that consciousness certainly does not benefit or is not ever enhanced by trying to connect to it through shame, guilt, fear, misogyny, patriarchy, and all of that. That's man-made. So we have to be very careful if we're actively participating in religion now. It's very easy to get reprogrammed every single time we attend. When we sing hymns, when we say prayers, a lot of those things have very demeaning and very separation consciousness oriented language in them. Be careful about that if you are participating actively. And the more you move down your spiritual path, many of you are already along there with me, where you realize, ooh, these words, this concept, this whole zeitgeist that I've been taught isn't really something that's life supportive. It isn't really something that's life affirmative. And beyond all of that, to me, the goal really of spirituality is to create inner and outer harmony, to create the conditions where success, fulfillment, joy, harmony, peace, fulfillment and healing of the body temple, fulfillment, healing of all of our needs being met individually and collectively. Spirituality is what is the path, holistic path for us to be able to manifest that. And a world that works for everyone might be another way of saying that. For us to get to that point, we have to get into what was God originally supposed to mean beyond the word, beyond the concept, beyond the patriarchal idea. What was God supposed to mean? And then we can realize, I don't need the word God anymore. I can use the word love. I can use the word consciousness, or I use no word at all, just to recognize the sacred, silent presence within me, within all things. We can realize that more through our spiritual practices like meditation, and we can begin to heal our lives. So this is the reason why so many of my group clearings are focused on religious programming, religious vows, all of this, because to really clean out the consciousness from all of that, the stuff that sounds like what spirituality is trying to do, but it's not. It's very distinctly different. It's much more of a negative egoic projection rather than something that's coming from an open heart. So I just wanted to share that with all of you, give you some food to think about. Any comments, questions you have about that, please feel free to post below. Thanks, everybody.